Good afternoon. I'm David Sandmel. I serve as the Interfaith Director at the Anti-Defamation League, and very grateful to Professor Rosenfeld and the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. Giovanni could not have done a better job in a sense, setting up what I'm going to share with you. You gave a very good overview, and now I'm going to take us into the weeds a little bit. In my paper, I explore the dynamics of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, as well as philo-Semitism through an examination of the ongoing debate over divestment, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and Jewish-Christian relations within the Presbyterian Church USA, focusing on the period beginning in 2004. We didn't plan this, it just worked out that way. I should also say that I've been very much involved as an activist with in dialogue with the PCUSA during that period of time, so this may not be the most objective academic paper I've ever given. The turmoil within the PCUSA over these issues is continuing to unfold in the lead up to the 2016 General Assembly, which will be held at the end of June in Portland, Oregon. The roots of the PCUSA go back to the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. The first American Presbyterian, what became the United Church, was founded in 1706. The church has a history of division and reorganization. The PCUSA was formed in 1983 with the union of the Presbyterian Church in the U.S., the so-called Southern Branch, and the United Presbyterian Church in the USA, the Northern Branch, which had split in 1861 over the issue of slavery and the federal union. In the 20th century, as battles over fundamentalism and modernism roiled the Christian community, a number of Presbyterian breakaway groups emerged. These are more conservative than the PCUSA and object to certain positions of the PCUSA, including the ordination of women and openly gay and lesbian clergy, as well as its definition of marriage as between two persons. The PCUSA's stand on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has contributed to this disillusionment and defection. In part as a result of both defections and divisions, and also demographic trends affecting the mainline churches in general, the membership of the PCUSA and its predecessors' bodies has been on decline since its peak in 1965 at 4.3 million members to a low of just under 1.7 million members in 2014. One Presbyterian leader suggested that at current rates, the denomination will zero out in 16 or 17 years, and even if the decline tapers off, this is not sustainable. Despite the drop-off in membership, the PCUSA's influence is greater than its numbers might suggest. Its decisions and pronouncements on controversial issues, especially Israel and Palestine, garner media attention, and therefore those on all sides have a vested interest in affecting positions taken by this dwindling denomination. Regarding the Israel-Palestinian conflict, it's possible to identify two camps within the PCUSA. One of these is the pro-divestment lobby, which emerges from the long presence of Presbyterians in the Middle East. The Presbyterian Church has been involved in the region since the early 19th century. During this time, a set of relationships has been formed between American Presbyterians and Middle Eastern Christians. Prior to 1967, Presbyterians were most active in Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and there was no Presbyterian presence in Jordan, Israel, or the Gaza Strip. After 1967, these increasingly became areas of activity, and relations with Palestinian Christians naturally grew. In addition, as Giovanni pointed out, liberal Protestants have been influenced by liberation theology, which privileges the poor and oppressed, but which often contains anti-Semitic elements that become exaggerated when applied to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The pro-divestment group is now represented by the Israel-Palestine Mission Network, or IPMN, formed by the General Assembly of the PCUSA in 2004 and charged with creating currents of wider and deeper Presbyterian involvement with Palestinian partners, aimed at demonstrating solidarity and changing the conditions that erode the humanity of Palestinians living in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. IPMN is closely aligned with the current leadership of the PCUSA. Some contend that the national office in Louisville is controlled by the IPMN. I'm going to demonstrate that the IPMN often uses both anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist rhetoric. On the other side is Presbyterians for Middle East Peace, a group that started to come together after the 2004 General Assembly and was formally established before the 2008 General Assembly. While IPMN was actually created by the General Assembly, PFMEP, I hope you're following me on all these initials, almost as bad as the Jewish community, has no official affiliation with the PCUSA. Like IPMN, PFMEP is concerned about the plight of Palestinians and is critical of Israeli policies. However, unlike the IPMN, it is unequivocally committed to Israel's right to exist and concerned that the theology, language, and policies proposed by the IPMN are anti-Israel, often anti-Semitic, and in conflict with what PFMEP considers Presbyterian Christian values and beliefs. Among these values are a commitment to positive Jewish-Christian relations and a deep affection and respect for Judaism and the Jewish people, which, for the purposes of this paper, I consider philo-Semitism. Most Presbyterians, including most commissioners, those who vote at the General Assemblies, are not affiliated with either group, but form a large middle. Polling data suggests that most Presbyterians, like most Americans, are broadly supportive of Israel, even if they object to specific policies or support Palestinian national aspirations. As a result, the pro-divestment and anti-divestment camps must wage vigorous campaigns for the votes of commissioners at the General Assemblies. At the 2004 General Assembly, the PCUSA approved an overture calling on the church to initiate a process of phased selective divestment in multinational corporations operating in Israel. The overture also stated that the occupation has proven to be at the root of the evil acts committed against innocent people on both sides of the conflict. Since then, an acrimonious debate has raged within the church and between the church and mainstream American Jewish organizations over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Critics both inside and outside the church accuse it of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Defenders of the church accuse the critics of willfully ignoring Israel's unjust treatment of the Palestinians and of being enthralled to the Jewish establishment. Now, I can't go into all of the details of this. That would actually be a rather lengthy book, so I'm just going to touch on three moments that are representative of the nature of this debate. A first moment was the release in 2008 of Vigilance Against Anti-Jewish Bias. After the 2004 vote, representatives of the Chicago Jewish community, I was one of them, engaged the Chicago Presbytery in a series of discussions to show that materials supporting the 2004 overture on Christian Zionism, a different overture than the divestment one, used language from the Adversus Judaeus tradition. The Presbytery representatives accepted our critique and wrote a detailed letter to the stated clerk of the PCUSA highlighting the problematic passages. This led to another series of meetings between a group of Presbyterians led by Reverend J. Rock, coordinator for interfaith relations of the PCUSA, and Jewish representatives. Again, I was among them. These discussions led Rock and his colleagues to write Vigilance, which was posted on the PCUSA website on May 2nd, 2008. It begins with the premise that Presbyterians are aware and do confess that anti-Jewish attitudes can be found among us. It specifically refers to overtures from 2004 when it says, "It does not help to import stereotypes, anti-Jewish motifs, or classic ideas of Christian anti-Jewish theology into our discussions." It then critiques PCUSA materials on Zionism. It says, "Zionism is often presented as a monolithic force or merely as an extension of European colonialism and result of anti-Semitism and nothing else. The problems and suffering of the Palestinians are attributed solely and inaccurately to Zionism alone. Finally, the document states that the writing of Palestinian liberation theologians, here quoting again, may vividly express and give meaning to the suffering of the Palestinian people, but it is troubling in its demonization of Israel and the Jewish people and its echoes of ancient Christian anti-Judaism. Vigilance was warmly praised by the major American Jewish organizations as groundbreaking and welcomed by some Presbyterians. However, about a month later, on June 11th, the original document was replaced by a revised version that provoked shock and anger among those who weeks before had reacted so positively. A letter signed by 11 major Jewish organizations charged that the revised statement is infused with the very bias that the original statement condemned. Among the changes, the revised statement describes Israel as the oppressive force in the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and removes the language recognizing that liberation theology can be troubling in its demonization. Instead, the burden is shifted to Jews who inevitably construe calling the Jewish state a crucifying power as anti-Jewish. Sources within the PCUSA reported that the IPMN, which did not see the original document in advance, insisted on the revisions. A religious news story reporter asked Reverend Rock about the changes. His terse reply underscores my point about two camps and the influence, I think, of IPMN on the national office. He said, "I will say that talking about the issue of anti-Jewish bias and advocacy for Israeli-Palestinian peace is difficult because it involves two commitments to justice that can easily seem contradictory," he admitted, declining to comment further on the controversy. Neither version of Vigilance, by the way, is now found on the PCUSA website. A second moment is the publication of Zionism Unsettled in January 2014 by the IPMN as part of its preparation for the 2014 General Assembly. This 76-page congregational study guide with an accompanying DVD was available for purchase on the PCUSA website. The document calls Zionism a false theology and argues inter alia that Zionism is the problem, destroying both indigenous Palestinian lives and rich Jewish communities across the globe in a supremacist misinterpretation of God's word on par with Christian exceptionalist beliefs that contributed to the Nazi Holocaust, the genocide of Native Americans, and countless other instances of tragic brutality. It also charges that the American Jewish community actively stifles dissent against the Zionist narrative, taking advantage of the ignorance and passivity of many liberal American Jews, and praises Jews who critique Zionism and Israel as contemporary voices breaking the taboos that have stigmatized and punished critical examination of Zionism and its consequences. No surprise, the document unleashed a firestorm of criticism from both Christians and Jews. AJC and ADL denounced it. J Street called it reductive and offensive. Reverend Catherine Henderson, president of Auburn Seminary and a leader of Presbyterians for Middle East Peace, wrote that the document expresses demonization, distortion, and imbalance. Reverend Christopher Layton, executive director of the Institute for Christian and Jewish Studies in Baltimore, called it a dishonest screed. He then said, "To suggest that the Jewish yearning for their own homeland, a yearning that we Presbyterians have supported for numerous other nations, is somehow theologically and morally abhorrent, is to deny Jews their own identity as a people." The word for that is anti-Semitism, and that is, along with racism, sexism, homophobia, and all the other ills our church condemns, a sin. The debate over the document continued at the 2014 General Assembly. An overture that Zionism Unsettled did not represent the views of the PCUSA was approved, but another to cease selling it on the website was rejected. The passage of overtures to divest from 3 companies, as well as one calling for the church to re-examine its position on a 2-state solution, generated another round of attacks and defense of the GA's actions. In the media, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was the story of the 2014 General Assembly. Much of the coverage was unfavorable to the denomination and focused on Zionism Unsettled. Shortly after the GA, the PCUSA stopped selling Zionism Unsettled on its website. In a carefully worded statement, Grady Parsons, stated clerk of the General Assembly, offered no opinion on the document. He merely described it as a distraction. We need to keep our focus on supporting and communicating the decisions of the General Assembly, and responding to a recent increase in feedback about the book is impacting our ability to do that. The IPMN continues to sell it on its own website. The third moment came in reaction to the 2014 General Assembly. In November 2014, a group of Presbyterians, leaders calling themselves Presbyterians for a Just and Peaceful Future in the Middle East, placed a full-page advertisement in the New York Times and the Christian Century under the headline, "Presbyterians Can Do Better Than Divestment." The ad dissented from the divestment decision, pointed out that the overture passed by a narrow margin, 310 to 303, do the math, 613, and therefore could not be said to represent the denomination. It rejected polarization, expressed a commitment to a two-state solution, and called for positive investment. Shortly thereafter, a pamphlet entitled "Reformed and Reforming, a Word of Hope from Commissioners to and Observers of the 221st General Assembly of the PCUSA" was sent to every Presbyterian congregation. The document, endorsed by many of the same Presbyterians who signed the New York Times ad, blames the leadership of the church for the grossly one-sided amount of time given to the pro-divestment position, as well as other irregularities that slanted the playing field in a pro-divestment direction. Also charged not only that the rules of the General Assembly, but also the spirit of Presbyterian decision-making were violated in a way that calls into question the integrity of the denomination itself, and it calls for significant changes at the 216 Assembly. Jeffrey Deyoe, the moderator of the IPMN, released a detailed rebuttal on the organization's website. He concluded that the PCUSA is but a human institution, the church, called out by Christ in spite of all its flaws. It is all right to critique and challenge those flaws on a regular basis. What is not all right is to denigrate the process because it did not yield results you wanted. Yep. Presbyterian supporters of divestment, especially the IPMN, vehemently reject any suggestion that they are anti-Semitic, despite the evidence that has been presented so far. But as they say on some advertisements on TV, there's more. In its report on the Israeli-Palestinian Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church USA, the Jewish Council on Public Affairs presents numerous screen grabs from IPMN's private Facebook page, which I believe were originally obtained by NGO Monitor. According to the report, this private Facebook page contained posts claiming that Jews in Israel are collectively responsible for societal woes from the war in Afghanistan to the housing market. Jews are not loyal Americans. Jews control money, media, and power. The Jewish covenant with God is null, having been superseded by the Christian covenant. Jewish national identity is inherently racist and illegitimate. The Jewish state is equated with Nazi Germany and apartheid South Africa. Israelis, their leaders and supporters are subhuman, worthy of being slandered, heckled, held hostage, and harmed. Some of the posts and links were posted or liked by leaders of the IPMN and people working for the PCUSA. There's a cartoon showing President Obama wearing Jewish star earrings, and a comment on that read, "Our glorious leader has his head firmly lodged between AIPAC's butt cheeks." This was liked by a member of the PCUSA staff. This entire Facebook page was removed in January of 2012 and seems to have been reestablished in April as a public page. A cursory review did not reveal similar materials to that found on the previous page, suggesting better moderation, but there are many calls for and links to BDS. The foregoing discussion demonstrates, I believe, that some of the those most active in promoting divestment and other anti-Israel actions by the PCUSA make liberal use of anti-Semitic rhetoric, often in its crudest form, and are opposed not to the policies of the State of Israel, but to its very existence. There are also those who express positive views of Jews and Judaism, support Israel's right to exist in security, and are disturbed by and reject the anti-Semitic views of the IPMN and others in the church. Some have suggested that part of the problem is that the PCUSA does not have an official position about its relationship to Jews and Judaism, a Presbyterian nostra aetate, as it were, by which actions and language can be judged. In an attempt to remedy this, the Chicago Presbytery again has written, "In our time, a statement on relations between the Presbytery of Chicago and the Jewish community in metropolitan Chicago." It's sharing this document with other presbyteries with the ultimate goal of bringing the document or its equivalent before the General Assembly in the future. While this is an admirable effort and may have some ameliorating effect on the denomination, it's unlikely to prevent expressions of anti-Semitism within the church any more than Nostra Aetate and subsequent documents, as good as they are, have eliminated anti-Semitism from the Roman Catholic Church. In the final analysis, the tensions within the PCUSA reflect the unresolved nature of the Christian relationship to Jews, Judaism, and the State of Israel, and the persistence of anti-Semitic attitudes even among liberal Christians who consider themselves committed to social justice. More specifically, it highlights theological and political challenges posed by the founding and continued existence of the State of Israel. The messiness of history and geopolitics does not lend itself to the kind of good versus evil dichotomy upon which much of the Presbyterian critique of Israel is based. Furthermore, it's disturbing that legitimate concerns for the well-being of Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians, so easily elicits anti-Jewish rhetoric, which, if targeted at other identifiable groups, would not be permitted within the PCUSA. Those within the PCUSA for whom a proper Christian understanding and relationship to Jews and Judaism require fundamental support for the State of Israel, but not necessarily its policies, may represent the majority within the church, but to date have not succeeded in mobilizing successfully. As the movement continues to shrink, these debates are sure to persist. Thank you.